What is the subtext, the message, the unspoken yet heard loud and clear with the Democrats' scheme to advance this presidential primary? They claim that the move would raise our profile, but the president is their incumbent. Why then would this change matter? The Democrats have their nominee. There's no real primary of any consequence. There's no hoopla, unless, of course, as many in the media have speculated that their party apparatus is working feverishly to prevent the president from seeking his own reelection. Well, then, of course, then the motivations would be quite obvious. The intention of this bill would be to promote Gretchen Whitmer as a presidential nominee for the president in 2024. But this shuffle raises some important and interesting questions that could have been answered in committee. President Biden initially seemed to support this scheme, but with his administration's uncertain and alternating upheavals, his punchy and bewildered reactions as he moves from gaffe to gaffe, pivoting this way and that, will he do another pivot and resent the shuffle if he perceives a competitor rising behind him? Michigan currently receives a lot of money from the feds. If this chamber wishes to announce to the world, as it may, that by passing this bill, the Michigan Democrat Party has made its decision that it may want to just thwart the President of the United States from seeking his own reelection, have they considered down the road how the White House might react? Have they considered what potential ramifications this might have on Michigan if the White House contemplates that their president might just get denied a chance at a second term due to Michigan governor's ambitions to replace him? Because, Mr. President, if billions are at stake, think what that could mean for the 10 million people in Michigan and the effects on them with these federal funds concerning their daily lives.
What's up, everybody? We are live now. Welcome to the Rescue Michigan weekly live stream. There were some folks in the chat wondering if that was a live recording. No, that was from the other day. That was Senator Jim Runstead calling out the Senate Democrats on a bill they just recently passed to move our presidential primary up a few extra weeks into February. So anyway, we are live now, though, and I want to give you guys some more context about that clip in a moment. But first, just welcome everybody. We are, of course, live on Facebook and Rumble, and yes, even YouTube for the time being. Just me tonight, unfortunately. Another busy time, more busy times, but yeah, that was a very interesting clip. And for those who don't know, the Democrats in the House and Senate just voted to pass that bill into law. It was signed into law by the governor just the other day to move our primary up extra early, which Jim Runstead was making a very interesting point. I wish I had played the entire clip, but you know, our little cold open segments are usually only about 2 minutes. But if you go to the Michigan Senate page, you can find the video archive, and it's the floor speeches from the 26th of January. You can see the whole thing. But he was laying into it because here's the backstory to all this. There's a lot of inside baseball that goes on around the presidential primaries, and in particular about the dates. And the reason, of course, you've heard the story that Iowa and New Hampshire, they're always the early primary states. New Hampshire calls itself first in the nation. They, of course, got the Iowa caucuses and so forth. And there's always been lots of jockeying for states to go early and earlier. So the parties say, we don't want you to go early. We're going to punish your national delegates if you go early, because the people that really do want to go early are the campaigns. And they want to go early in the states they think they've got a really good shot of winning, because, you know, if you're running for president, you want to have that momentum, right? You win Iowa or New Hampshire or South Carolina, and you can carry that momentum. That is how Joe Biden became the nominee for the Democrats in 2020. He was going nowhere fast in Iowa and New Hampshire. And then the Jim Clyburn political machine kicked into high gear in South Carolina, and of course the National Democrat machine behind it. So Biden got a decisive victory in South Carolina. The media immediately said, oh, that's it, Biden's the nominee. Instantaneously, Pete Buttigieg dropped out, and Amy Klobuchar and the rest of them, and poof, like that. And that's a major part of how the Democrat political machine works. But of course, it worked that way for the Republicans too in 2008 and again in 2012. the Michigan Republican establishment was absolutely in total support of Mitt Romney. Why is that? Because his dad was governor here. He had a lot of lingering political machinery in Michigan. So they wanted to move Michigan's primary up really, really early. And the Republican Party said, well, we're going to penalize your delegates if you do that. So in 2000, but they did it anyway, because they said, we don't care about the delegates voting. We want to get that bump from Romney coming out of Michigan. We know Romney's going to win Michigan because all of the GOP party bosses are working for Romney. So we don't care if our delegates don't get to vote at the national convention. We want Mitt Romney to have an early win so that he can go on to win the nomination and lose the presidency. And in 2008, of course, Romney did not become the nominee. And at the national convention, the delegates were just forgiven. They were supposed to be punished and had their voting rights stripped away. But the party said, nah, don't worry about it. We don't care. In 2012, Romney won and the RNC did punish the delegates. And so when we sent our delegation to the national convention, half of them were what were called in waiting. We had delegates and alternates in waiting was the term for it. And they didn't get to vote at the national convention, which turns out wasn't important anyway. So whatever. Anyway, so cut to present day. And the Michigan Democrats in the House and Senate just ignored the entire committee process to run a bill to move Michigan's primary into late February. So what do you think the angle is there, folks? Somebody needs an early win in Michigan. Who might that be? Would it be Donald Trump? The Democrats care about that? And by the way, I don't have a crystal ball or anything, but if you look at the polls, it looks like, unless maybe DeSantis enters or some crazy stuff happens, looks like Trump's going to be our nominee in 2024. And as Runstead was pointing out, isn't Joe Biden supposed to be the Democrats' nominee in 2024? Oh, but what if he doesn't run for re-election? What if someone's getting thrown under the bus? Well, then we've got a whole different story going, don't we? So that was the point Jim Runstead was making. Well, first of all, number one, that's what they're doing. That's what the Democrats were doing, was kissing Gretchen Whitmer's ass, because they want her to run. Yeah, Mark on Facebook says Biden will not run in 2024. Yeah, that's right, Mark. And again, it's especially in the Democrat Party, the illusion of choice. The party bosses are pulling strings behind the scenes. They are not going to let Joe Biden run for re-election. And the Michigan Democrats, I don't think they actually believe Gretchen Whitmer is going to be the nominee. That's just my personal opinion, but Gretchen Whitmer does not have the kind of political machinery that someone like a Gavin Newsom has, or a Bob Menendez, or a Jim Clyburn has. Gretchen Whitmer has been the recipient of a lot of support from various Democrat machines around the country, particularly because of Michigan's right to work law, which we'll be talking about again in a few minutes here. But they wanted to kiss Gretchen Whitmer's ass, was what that was all about. And as Jim Runstead made the point, what they just did was effectively announce for the whole world to hear that their Democrats are going to be vetoing Joe Biden for the nomination. He's not going to be allowed to run again. And as Runstead points out, if you want the Michigan Democratic Party to be the people on the record, effectively saying that to people who know, and, the media does know. They'll pretend not to know. They know what that was all about. There are billions and billions of dollars in federal funding, and telling the White House you're not going to be given billions and billions of dollars, maybe to a state that has a political machine that's hostile to you, are you? It's all speculation, but interesting, though, that they play those partisan political games. And this, to me, is a talking point. This is a point of attack, right, on the Democrats? Because, there's people in Michigan that receive those federal funds, billions and billions of dollars. And when the entire Democrat Party in Michigan just signals to the White House, hey, your guy's not going to get to run for re-election, that impacts the legislative process. That impacts how money is spent in all kinds of unfathomable different ways. And how sad that the Democrats couldn't even have these bills get a hearing in committee for these issues to be talked about before they went on record, because they want to get it all done super quick, right? Before anybody had a chance to think about it, what they were really doing. Half the House is freshmen. They have no clue what any of this is. They don't know about any of this stuff. But Runstead just called it all out. And by the way, that clip went on for like another 3 minutes of just rubbing it in. This is all a partisan play for Big Gretchen. You better think about what you're doing to your constituents, because the White House got the message loud and clear, even if the average person in Michigan never even heard about this. But anyway, welcome to our show. We got lots of other things to talk about, lots of interesting things happening in Lansing and in Washington this week. The Chinese balloon being shot down notwithstanding. I don't think that's, well, I don't know. I've heard both sides of this. Some people say, you know what, if they're spying on us, the satellites do a much better job. Some people say they don't. I think there's a lot of stuff going on behind the scenes, and maybe there's some diplomacy issues with things happening in China right now that we're not being told about. But whatever, for whatever reason, that was the big story that monopolized the news this week. But I prefer to stay focused on some of the things that are a little closer to our lives, to our hearts, and more importantly, to our focus. So I do want to talk a little bit about choosing battles and about how politicians react to pressure, because this is the reason why we do this stuff, folks. It's easy to forget, isn't it? When you're supporting campaigns and supporting candidates and everything else, what's the whole reason that we throw away so much time in our lives to be engaged in politics? It's to change public policy, right? It's to change how we are governed. Who rules whom is the means to the end. And we all have limited resources in what we can do on these things. And it's so easy with all these candidates and the campaigns and blah, 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 to forget about the goal, which is what can we stop them from doing? And what can we do to change the way we interact with the people who ultimately decide what public policy is? So a few interesting things happened. You may recall, I believe it was last week. And Jay, I'm getting to your question. I see your question. Jay on Facebook says, how has the petition letters been doing over the past weeks? How many people are using them? You know, we're not the only ones using them. We've actually had users use our petitions, and I'm going to talk about how effective they've been. That's right where I was going with this. Last week, not this past week, the week before, there were a number of Democrat bills that had an awful lot of Republicans voting for them. One was the so-called pension tax repeal, which was, by the way, not a pension tax. It's a tax that's applied to all income equally, retirement income and non-retirement income alike. And there was a pension tax exemption some years ago that I believe the Republicans actually did away with when they were in power. And of course, the Democrats flipped out about that, and that's where they got this tagline: the Republicans are taxing pensions. Well, the huge majority of people with pensions are government retirees. Most of the rest of us have moved on to 401ks and things like that. But pensioners tend to be government employees, people who have spent their and people who have been long-time government employees too, like 20 plus years. We're talking career bureaucrats. So there was a bill in the House and Senate to, as the Democrats would say, repeal the pension tax, which was actually to reinstate a tax credit for pensioners, mostly government employee retirees. And 8 Republicans voted for that turkey, which we mentioned to, something like 70,000 of our best friends over the emails. And there was another vote last week, the week before last, sorry, but that was even more supported by Republicans. And that was to increase what's called, misleadingly, the earned income tax credit. The earned income tax credit sounds like you're getting a tax break on your earned income, right? It's supposedly a tax cut targeted towards low-income workers. Well, that sounds great, doesn't it? Here's the thing. It's what's called refundable. And by the way, it also compounds with the federal earned income tax credit. So a lot of low-income wage earners don't actually owe anything in income tax. What the earned income tax credit does is literally write them checks. So in Michigan, your tax dollars, your income tax dollars, were paying for people that didn't owe income tax. And they get more than they owed. They get checks in the mail. Well, then that's not tax relief anymore, is it? That's wealth redistribution. That's taking money from people that pay income tax and giving it to people that don't pay income tax. So last week, we sent out an email blast calling attention to all of this and pointing out that most Republicans in the House, not most Republicans in the Senate, interestingly, voted with the Democrats on this. Now, what does that tell you? Because that's weird. That's unusual for the House Republicans to be worse than the Senate Republicans. here's how I read that, because by and large, the House is the more populist of the two chambers. The House has elections more frequently. The House members have higher turnover. Senators, most of them were House members in the past. And so they usually are, the senators are the ones that were more loyal to the lobbyists and less loyal to their constituents, because they've been around longer. They have their own base. They've been listening to the lobbyists for a long time. They tend to be worse in the Senate. But in this case, they were very different. Well, maybe because the senators and the Republican senators remembered, hey, we just lowered the earned income tax credit a few years ago. I voted for that. Whereas these incoming freshman House members had no idea, and they got spun around by people in Lansing. They listened to the Democrats' messaging, and they heard all the usual garbage from the political hacks. Oh, you're in a low-income district, and this is tax relief for your people. They hear the messaging of the Democrats, and typical Republicans don't even think twice. Like, should have been a clue to them when all the Democrats are co-sponsoring these bills. They might be bad policy, you know? But no, most of them voted for it. So we did an email blast, and we lit into them good. And I got a call from a lawmaker later that day, a freshman lawmaker, but someone who's, well, let's just say the family of that individual has been around Lansing for some time. And you guys can guess all you want, but there's a lot of those people, by the way. You know, we have spouses of lawmakers, children of lawmakers. Happens all the time, more often than you might think. Anyway, this freshman lawmaker was very, very upset. We called him a rhino. And he didn't appreciate being called a rhino. And you see, his policy is to always vote for tax cuts across the board, no matter what they are, no matter who they're for. He says this is his conservative principles. He will support any tax cuts, even for people that didn't pay the income tax in the first place, apparently. Even for government employees. Now, funny thing is, by the way, Mr. Politician, by the way, the reason I'm not telling you who it is only because when politicians contact me, I don't want them to stop contacting me. So I'm not going to say who it is unless I want to later on. But for the time being, I'm not going to say. It's not important. But anyway, the Democrats are in power right now. They decide what bills come to the floor, right? So your policy, Mr. Politician, is you'll vote for any tax cuts that the Democrats allow you to vote for. So you're going to vote for a tax cut for government employee retirees. You're going to vote for a tax credit for people that didn't owe the tax to begin with. You're going to vote for other tax cuts the Democrats lay to vote for next. You're going to vote for a tax cut for Dan Gilbert, right? Tax cut for DTE, tax cut for Consumers Energy, tax cut for Dow Chemical, tax cut for Kellogg's. What about the working man? When does he get a tax cut? The Democrats going to bring those up to the floor? No. Oh. So what you're really just saying is you're supporting the Democrats' tax plan. That's what you're doing, aren't you? Anyway, there's a lesson in here. When the politicians start contacting you because they're mad, first off, there's a question you have to always ask yourself. How does it benefit them if I believe this? This guy wanted me to stop. This guy wanted to be reasonable. Wanted me to be reasonable, by which he means, hey, hear the other side. Don't just send your people into a lather about this. Because, what does that tell me? Why'd this guy pick up the phone to call little old me? Because I caused him some pain. Because he's got constituents that he has to explain this to who voted for him thinking he was some kind of conservative. Yeah, Mark says, don't stop, put the screws to him. Yeah, oh yeah. Well, guess what happened this past week in Lansing? There were no dissenting Republicans on any Republican or any Democrat bills. Imagine that. Now, this past week was a fairly quiet week in Lansing. Other than passing the moving up to the presidential primary, there was no intensely controversial bills. But this is what's called political puppy training, folks. They have to understand there is a penalty for bad behavior. And especially these freshmen, these new people, right? Because a lot of them had people whispering in their ears telling them, don't worry, this is a good thing for you. This will be a good thing for you. They're getting bad political advice. From whom? From lobbyists? From political hacks? and frankly, from the Republican establishment that all too often just doesn't have the fight in them to begin with. I'll tell you a story. A few years ago, there was a plan to put a huge minimum wage increase on the ballot, and in particular to also, and on top of that, to also repeal the tipped credit, which means, or the tip exemption. So in other words, all servers would all automatically have to be paid this new higher minimum wage. The result would have been huge layoffs, restaurant closures, higher menu prices. A terrible thing for anyone who works in a restaurant. I mean, first of all, to be told now that you've been training to be a cook for the past, you've been cooking and cooking for weeks and you're good at your job and you've been getting pay raises. Now all of a sudden you make the same as a dishwasher. But more importantly, you know, restaurants are competing in a tough economy. And, you know, people have an image of every business owner being, you know, some guy with money bags. And when you raise the minimum wage, oh, we'll just have to pay everyone more. I guess we have to. No. Businesses go under. Restaurants go out of business all the time. And the minimum wage in real life, reality, is zero. So you're not raising the minimum wage when you pass a law outlawing the labor employment agreement that restaurants and their workers have. You're destroying jobs, and they're going to lose wages because their wage is going to go from what was the old minimum wage, which is now illegal, down to zero. So I was working for Representative Riley at the time, and I know that this is not an issue that the voters understand particularly well. And in fact, politicians are not very good at messaging about this. So he put an op-ed into the Detroit News. The title was "Don't Outlaw Low-Income Jobs." And it was a burner. It was great. Got published. Ran in the opinion section. And so we went to the Michigan Restaurant Association to collect our brownie points. Look what we did. Isn't this great? We're going to fight this minimum wage increase. And the Restaurant Association people sit us down. Oh, John, you babe in the woods. Let me tell you how things really happen in Lansing, John. We have no chance of beating this if it goes to the ballot. We fought it in Colorado, spent $7 million. We got John Elway to be our spokesman, and it lost on the ballot. If this goes to the ballot, we lose, period. All we can do is try to get it off the ballot, try to have Republicans pass a compromise minimum wage increase that'll keep it off the ballot, and we'll just lose less. That was their attitude. Not entirely wrong. But why does the public have a poor understanding of the minimum wage? Because the stakeholders, like these people, these very people, never fought it. What kind of message does it send when you're a newly elected Republican and you're voting with all of the Democrats on a bill and you're using their messaging, and this being so-called quote-unquote tax relief? This is what they all did. Angela Regas, freshman, we supported her. I supported her personally. Post on her Facebook page, yes, I voted with the Democrats to give hardworking Michiganders tax relief. What kind of message are you sending? Well, for one thing, you're sending a message the Democrats ain't so bad. They're doing good things, aren't they? Giving your hard-earned tax dollars to people that don't pay income tax, sure. Giving your hard-earned tax dollars to people that are retired government employees. But hey, the Democrats are doing the good thing, aren't they? According to her. If voters remember when the Republicans, when they were in power, did the opposite. Those were partisan bills. I guess the message that she's sending is the Democrats are better than the Republicans. Is that a long-term winning strategy, do you think? I doubt it. I doubt it. So this is why when the Republicans do the wrong thing, you occasionally have to light them up. And they will do everything to make you stop. But this is the only way that they learn. Because ultimately, in the long run, it's not a winning strategy, what they're doing. And the only thing they understand is angry voters. They want that majority back. They need their base. Angela Regas wants a second term. She needs her base, especially her. She doesn't have anybody else. But it's not just her. All but 8 of the Republicans in the House voted for these bad bills. And we noted in our email the few who didn't. But the rest of them need to be called what they are. And they need to be confronted, and they need to be put under pressure. The ultimate pressure being a primary challenger. And they will do everything they can to make you stop. They will attack you. They will say, you're hurting our caucus, you're hurting our cause. No, you hurt your cause by voting wrong. Don't blame the messenger. Every time they push back on this, you have to double down. Aaron Tuckfield says, Jamie Green from Richmond. Yes, Jamie Green did the right thing. She did the smart thing. One of the smarter freshmen. So that's the way it goes. And by the way, politicians have lots of ways to get you to stop. They'll try ignoring you at first if they can, but once you get a rise from them, you know you're starting to make an impression. And they'll try different things. They'll try sometimes just being nice with you. They'll try explaining it to you. I assure you, I've heard the same story 100 times. Years ago, I used to work at, actually, I still work at Campaign. Well, I work at Campaign for Liberty again, but some 10 years ago, I was doing all the editing for these different state affiliates that they had and sending out their email blasts on all these different issues, whether it was in South Carolina, where Nikki Haley was opposing a bill to require roll call votes be recorded, or whether it was in, there was all kinds of places. There was gun rights fights in Colorado, and there's all these different political battles happening everywhere. And the way the politicians react is the same thing in every state on every issue to get you to stop. They may try threatening you. I've heard that before. When we ran our program against the marijuana cartel bill a couple of years ago, Joe Bellino got up and said, I was going to vote against that bill, and now I'm so mad at you, I might even vote for it. No, he didn't, though. And the sponsor lost his race. So, lesson learned that when we send out angry emails and make voters angry, negative things happen to politicians. And they feel a little bit of pain, and they say, you know what, I don't like that. Maybe I'll do the right thing next time. As Senator Everett Dirksen would say, when I feel the heat, I see the light. And that's the way that works. Mark asks, can I see that letter you sent out? Which letter, Mark? I'm not sure what you were referring to. Sorry, you have to clarify that for me. Patty asks, who is proactively helping and advising / helping a new rep so they don't get bamboozled? Good question. I've heard that in the House, Annette Glenn has been counseling some of the freshmen, but she can't make them listen. I think Annette Glenn does know. I used to work for her husband, Gary Glenn, on his campaigns. So I know that she knows. And she knows how this all works. Most of them do. But, they'll say whatever they think they need to say. Because it's hard. It's hard for a politician to admit they screwed up. You're not going to see very many people in Lansing say, oops, you're right. I did vote wrong on that bill, didn't I? They'll never do that. But what they may do is hope by election season next year, we've forgotten about it. And maybe we will if they get their act together and vote right in the future. Otherwise, we may remind them as often as necessary. In fact, we still have, I think I might here, I'm going to share my screen. I haven't done any screen sharing yet tonight. We still have, it's not linked on our homepage anymore, but we do have our old report card from cycle last time around. I'll pull it up here. Hold on. This was our little candidate report card from last year, all the things that the lawmakers voted bad on. Oh, you know what? I'm sorry. This list is all screwed up, guys. No, never mind. Okay, we can't look at this anymore. It's not on our homepage anymore. I forgot. There's been a change in lawmakers in the new term, and I replaced our listing of the state house members and state senate members with the new ones. So this is all wrong. Jeff Irwin does not have a positive score in the Senate. That was Jim Runstead because he used to be in the 15th district. Now he's in a different one. So ignore these numbers. They are completely wrong. Let's just never mind the names of the politicians. Let me do it this way. I'll just share the screen and I'll try to cut this off on the side. These are all the bad scores that the lawmakers had in the past term. And you can see we got very few good ones in the Senate. and very few good ones in the House. For the most part, the Republicans and the Democrats were almost as bad as each other. So a very small number of them got good positive scores, and the rest of them, we're giving people ammunition. Oh yeah. Anyway, yeah. All right. Let me close this window. This is not good because it's got the wrong lawmakers' names on the bad scores. Barry says forwarding your email to 300 plus voters in Shriver and Steele's backyard. See, and there you go, Barry. That's interesting because Donnie Steele and Josh Shriver voted very differently on those bills, didn't they? Josh Shriver voted right on those bills. Donnie Steele voted wrong. And what do you think people in that neck of the woods are going to say? They're going to carry the politician's message for them. They're going to say, well, Josh Shriver's in a safe seat. He can afford to vote like a conservative Republican. Donnie Steele's in a swing seat. She's got Lake Orion and Bloomfield Hills in her district. She's in a much tougher seat. Therefore, she needs to vote with the Democrats more. Folks, if you want to know how to be a good, effective person in politics, do what the Democrats do. Don't do what the Republicans do. There's a state senator, used to be a state rep, who named Darren Camilleri. The seat he ran for and won in the House had previously been held by a Republican named Pat Somerville. It was a swing seat. And Pat Somerville held that seat because he knocked on doors like nobody's business. He didn't go to any dinners in Lansing. Every single day he went back to his district and knocked on doors, and he held the seat. He got term limited out of office. Darren Camilleri came into office as a Democrat. He was in a swing seat. You think the Democrats told him, oh yeah, you should vote with Republicans a lot. That way you'll win your seat. No. One of the most rancid, hyper-partisan left-wing Democrats in the caucus. It didn't hurt him. It helped him. If Donnie Steele had voted the way Josh Shriver did and said, yeah, I voted against these things because the hardworking people in our district need tax relief, not retired bureaucrats and people that don't pay income tax. That's a winning message in any community of working people, which is most of them. But when she votes with the Democrats, you think that's going to help her? You think the Democrats are going to not compete for that seat? You think they're going to say, oh, Donnie Steele voted with the Democrats 80% of the time, therefore she's just like one of us? No. They're going to run a Democrat against her, and they're going to attack her. And if her voting record was more conservative, you think their attack is going to be weaker? They'll just lie if they need to. They'll twist things out of proportion. They'll spin things to be the opposite of what they are, like calling a tax cut for pensioners a tax repeal. And if all else fails, let's make something up. We're going to attack her one way or the other. What difference is it going to make? The only difference is her base that might know better now is demoralized. Her base that knows better sees, oh, she's voting with the Democrats a lot. This is another reason why there's so few people involved in politics, folks. Because they see this stuff happening. They're like, you know what? What's the point? They vote the same all the time anyway. Jay asks, will you be compiling a new report card over time? Yes. In fact, I think I'm going to even do one for the first quarter or first 100 days or something like that. Yeah, I think the earlier and the more frequently, the better. So yeah, we'll be doing a lot more of that. But here's something else that happened this past week. Tim Walberg, congressman from southern Michigan, the whole bottom strip of Michigan, basically, became the first member of the Michigan delegation to co-sponsor the Audit the Fed bill, the Federal Reserve Transparency Act. Wonder why that happened. Oh, because he started getting letters asking him to. See, I tell you, folks, you hear all the time people say these petitions, they don't matter. They don't matter. Politicians care about their constituents. And whatever else they are hardworking. And they do want to win re-election. And they want their caucus to keep or regain its majority. And when there's a lot of angry voters out there about an issue, they tend to shape up because they want that majority back. They don't want their base demoralized. Now, they may tell you, I don't read those petitions. I've heard that before. I was telling a story at one of my grassroots leadership schools, which, by the way, we have coming up in Ann Arbor and Troy. I'll post that on the screen in a moment here. I was telling them how you've heard politicians say, I don't read these form letters. I only read handwritten letters. And someone raised their hand and said, Lana Tice told me that. Yeah. The biggest purveyors of the myths of politics is the politicians themselves. They don't want angry voters and they don't want getting lots of letters. But here's the reality. When a politician gets 100 pre-printed postcards that all say the exact same thing on it, and they're actually from their constituents, from people in their district, as opposed to, you know, if you have a letter writing campaign to tell, you know, Speaker Kevin McCarthy something, it's like, well, I don't care about these people. I care about my constituents. If you send a stack of pre-printed postcards that all say the same thing on them to your lawmaker, what are they going to think? That's 100 voters that care about this issue. They don't care if it's handwritten or not. In fact, those 100 pre-printed postcards that all say the same thing, those form letters, are telling them something more than what 100 handwritten letters say. It tells them an organized group is behind this, an organized group that might remind voters about this if I keep voting badly, or if I vote badly. And then they change their behavior. They tell you, I only want to see handwritten letters because they know that people don't write handwritten letters. And if I tell the Rescue Michigan email list, hey, write a letter to your lawmaker, you have to write it yourself, handwritten, and put a stamp on it and mail it in, nobody would do it. But at the end of the day, when they get a letter from a constituent, they know people at home care. And especially in Lansing, you'd be amazed how few letters they actually get. And again, folks, I've seen this from all sides. I worked in Congress when they had the biggest gun rights fight in the past 20 years. When I worked in Washington, it was right after the Sandy Hook shooting. And we got hundreds, thousands of letters from people telling us to ban firearms, to have reasonable gun controls like a universal gun registration, banning full capacity magazines, banning scary looking weapons, and all the rest. Democrats didn't go, you know, Kerry Bentivolio is a Republican. We don't need to bother sending him a letter. No. They sent us thousands of letters, and you should be sending these to these petitions to your Democrat lawmakers too, because they only see what comes in. And the Democrats were hoping that all they got were letters, all we got were letters from them saying everybody supports reasonable gun control. And sometimes they think they're trying to be cute, and they'll say, I'm a gun owner and a Second Amendment supporter, and I'm a Republican, but I support reasonable gun control. Yeah, right. We got lots of those too. But thankfully, we also got thousands and thousands of petitions and postcards from the National Association for Gun Rights, Gun Owners of America, and even the NRA, trying to defend gun rights. And what ended up actually happening was that those confrontational groups, the groups that don't take guff from the politicians, went after the rhinos in that fight. They went after Eric Cantor. And they went after a lot of the U.S. senators that were being really, really, really bad on gun control. And ended up knocking a bunch of them out. Several Republicans announced their retirement. Democrats lost that seat. That was the worst election for the Democrats in probably since 1994, maybe even before then, was the 2014 elections. Because there were so many petitions sent in. The gun rights groups grew their organizations by making these fights. They sent out fundraising letters. They got contributions. They used the contributions to reach more people, get more petitions, more letters, use the funds to run ads in these Democrat districts and these target districts. And what happened at the end of the day? We got no gun control legislation made it through to the president's desk. And this was when Barack Obama was president, keep in mind. They got absolutely nothing in gun restrictions. And it was a Democrat bloodbath that next year. And also a few rhinos got taken down too, including Eric Cantor, which was historic. So yeah, that signing the petition stuff really does work. Anyway, you can learn all about this and a lot more at our upcoming grassroots leadership schools in Ann Arbor. And one was just announced this week for Troy. So if you go to the Rescue Michigan homepage, I will share my screen. On our homepage there, under the action alerts, we've got Operation Watchdog. This is where we learned about some of these things that are moving through the House and Senate. We're bringing more people in on this every week. We're going to start really drilling down on committees if they ever actually have committee hearings. But we're watching them. We're watching all the things that are going on in Lansing. So sign up for that if you want to be involved in that project. And then here's the link. Attend the Grassroots Leadership School in Ann Arbor, Saturday, February 25th, or in Troy, Saturday, March 4th. This is an 8-hour program. It's a lot you're going to learn from me, I hope, on everything from legislative work, some of the things we just talked about, but also fundraising, organization building, knocking on doors, messaging, communications, building email lists, all these things that lead to effective political outcomes. And that is the name of the game, people. On our petition to audit the Fed is on there too. On our petition to defend Michigan's right to work law. By the way, the National Right to Work Committee is now in town. Of course, they are fighting the repeal of the right to work law, which we've talked about in this show before. I don't know if we need to talk about it all over again. But the people that taught me how to do politics are the people that were at the National Right to Work Committee, the National Association for Gun Rights, people who have had the experience of having to pass controversial legislation where Republicans had to be dragged kicking and screaming to do the right thing. And this is the way it all works. So if you want to learn more, click on that link on our homepage and sign up for the Grassroots Leadership Schools. They are coming up, and people who have attended tell me they're really good. So there you go. And there's going to be, I think there may be one coming up in Jackson too. We're still working on booking that. So, and if you have a group, if you can promise me you'll bring at least 20 people out, we can book one in your neck of the woods if you're not in those areas as well. James Show asks, are we going to have a problem with Republicans voting to repeal right to work? Oh, yeah, we're going to have a big problem. Oh, you mean, will there be a problem? Well, there could be. There are a few who are targets. In fact, some of them voted against passing right to work. Dale Zorn, who is now in the state house, I think he might have been in the state house back in 2012, went to the state Senate, got termed out there. Now he's back in the House for 2 more years. He voted against right to work. And he's in Monroe County. Figure that out. Yeah, so we shall see. But that will be a problem, and we need to do everything we can to make sure that Republicans understand they're going to be the first targeted if they, I mean, again, when they feel the heat, they see the light. And in this fight, we have allies that are going to be joining us as well. And of course, with the red flag legislation, all the anti-gun rights stuff, there are serious organized gun rights groups that are joining in as well. But some of the stuff, you know, it's hard to have people mobilizing on every issue under the sun, but that's kind of where Operation Watchdog kicks in. You know, when we put out that incumbent report card I had on the screen earlier, we hadn't told lawmakers all year long, these are the things we're going to be key voting. Some groups do that. I prefer them to not know what we're going to be key voting. Their job's to vote right all the time. And that's, by the way, not entirely a praiseworthy thing. You know, if you're not voting to take away our liberty, I mean, great, but what do you want, a prize for that? Mark asked, what do you have set up to stop the attack on right to work? Well, it's going to be a whole program. And that's going to mean, well, all kinds of things. I mean, that, and depending on what our budget allows for, that can mean text campaigns, mail campaigns, email campaigns. Right to Work Committee will probably put ads on television even. We'll see. I don't know, and I don't want to, and first of all, I don't know what their plans are. I'm not going to reveal theirs, but we'll do what our resources allow. We look for who are the most important people to target, Republicans and Democrats. All we need is one Republican in the House to refuse to vote for it, and they can't pass it. So that's what targeted pressure is going to putting all the resources into just the right places. All these things and more you will learn at our Grassroots Leadership Schools. So there you go. Now, of course, sometimes you punish people after the fact, as we did on those tax votes, but ideally you stop things before they start, before they get out of hand. And that's what is in process right now with right to work, with stopping Gretchen Whitmer's red flag law and everything else. That's how that stuff goes. So that's kind of the main thing I want to talk about tonight. There's been a few things in the news. Ilhan Omar got kicked off of the Foreign Affairs Committee in the House. I thought that was interesting. Very interesting discussion Glenn Greenwald had with Marjorie Taylor Greene on his Rumble show this week. If you haven't seen that, I encourage you to check that out. I have to admit, I had what I'm certain was Glenn Greenwald's attitude going into that interview, which was kudos to them for kicking off Eric Swalwell and Adam Schiff from the intelligence committees, because they had abused that authority in very serious, appalling ways to damage our whole country, telling lies about classified information and so forth. But I shared Glenn Greenwald's opinion that Ilhan Omar's opinions, repulsive though they may be, should not necessarily merit expulsion from a committee, and this is lowering the standard. Yeah, Democrats broke that dam when they expelled Marjorie Taylor Greene herself from her committee assignments, but by legitimizing that, by doing it themselves, that could be a real problem. So Glenn asked her this and pressed her on it, Marjorie Taylor Greene. She's like, well, I'll tell you, Glenn, there's two key differences. First thing is I was expelled from all committees and allowed to be on no committees, whereas Ilhan Omar has only been removed from the Foreign Affairs Committee. There's 30 some other committees that Democrats can put her on. And secondly, I was expelled from these committees for things I said before I was even a congressman, not for things that I was saying while I was serving my constituents, and things Ilhan Omar has said are just objectively hostile to a foreign country that we have to have relations with. So anyway, interesting discussion. You can check that out on Glenn Greenwald's channel. I have to admit, I went into that sharing the opinion that this was a dangerous thing. It is not necessarily a good thing when Republicans debase themselves going along with what Democrats do. And I'll give you another example of that. Of course, the Democrats burned the Constitution, attacked our country, and attempted to overthrow the president of the United States when they impeached Donald Trump. Both times. The first time was for a call with a Ukrainian, was it with the Ukrainian ambassador? Yeah, it was with, not the ambassador, but whoever, some official in Ukraine. A wholly proper conversation, as Donald Trump likes to point out. And he was impeached over that for exercising his presidential powers. And the supposed standard for that was, well, he's targeting a political enemy, which is, first of all, not automatically true, and second of all, doesn't mean that's not his privilege. And then, of course, secondly, for supposedly inciting the January 6th, well, call it whatever you want, riots, protests, whatever. Despite the fact that he explicitly said to be peaceful and not to break any laws, they impeached him for that anyway. Disgraceful debasement of the Constitution itself and the First Amendment and everything else. Well, after that whole thing was over, some Republicans introduced articles of impeachment against Gretchen Whitmer. And what was their standard? It was actually even lower than that, folks. I hate to tell you, but there was, I think, two competing impeachments. I think Bo LaFave put his in first, and then Matt Maddock put in his. And I thought, okay, well, what's the high crime and misdemeanor you're accusing Gretchen Whitmer of? And it was like, well, she enacted these policies that led to unnecessary deaths and things. Well, problem is, all public policy causes death and pain. All of it does. If that's your argument, okay, well, then I guess we can never go to war. People die in war. You know, when you make energy more expensive, people freeze. People get evicted from their homes. All public policy has real world consequences for people, up to and including fatal consequences. So if your standard is anything that can cause harm to somebody is an impeachable offense, then your standard of impeachment is basically nothing. It's for impeaching you for having bad policy, which is not a crime. I argued that what they needed to do was establish malice on the part of Gretchen Whitmer. For example, locking down and destroying the state of Michigan, when then she herself goes out and marches without a mask at Democrat rallies, at Black Lives Matter rallies. When we had a march against lockdowns in Lansing, Operation, what was it called? The big trucker rally, Operation Gridlock. She called us disease spreaders, said we were responsible for people's deaths, and said she may need to extend the lockdowns just because we came to Lansing to assemble. And then a week and a half later, she's marching with Black Lives Matter. The same day, they're flipping over police cars and lighting them on fire in Lansing and writing ACAB in graffiti. That shows malice. but those things weren't argued in these impeachments. So the point being, Republicans should not lower themselves playing the Democrats' games, because at the end of the day, all we actually do is show that we're no better than them, and that they're okay to have done this in the first place. We shouldn't do these things. So anyway, where was I? what led me to that whole thing? Oh yeah, the Elon Omar stuff. Yeah, some news, some stuff in the news. All right, Aaron has asked me, no MI GOP endorsement from you tonight. Next week? All right, I'll level with you guys, and I will make my endorsement, I suppose. I wasn't sure I was going to, you know. So the thing is, I'm kind of wearing two hats these days. I got the Rescue Michigan hat, and I'm also now the executive director of my county GOP, and we have to be neutral. We have to be supportive of things, and, you know, yeah, Mark says the fact you used Laura against, well, again, you have to show malice, because otherwise it's just policy. Anyway, I believe that as an officer of the Republican Party, you should not and cannot use that office to attack Republicans, because that's just dishonorable. But you saw what I just said about all these Republican lawmakers, right? So what's the deal? I'm not wearing my GOP hat right now. I'm wearing my Rescue Michigan hat. And I'm not going to do stuff like that when I'm, you know, when I'm speaking on behalf of the GOP or the GOP function or whatever. But you've got to be able to separate those things, and that's tough for us. You know, we don't have people on our panel tonight because people have to say controversial things, and do say controversial things on our show. You know, I heard the other day, Amber was telling me a few weeks ago when she was on our show, she made a joke about saying that she thinks that you need to own property to vote, which was a joke on me and Shane because we don't own our property. Which, before you think I'm poor, I'm not. I have an arrangement with somebody who's a supporter of the cause, and so I have a really good deal where I live. So I rent property, but you know, it's a house with 4 acres and a 6-car garage. So it is what it is. But anyway, she made a joke on the show, and to this day, she hears from people, you said this and this on the Rescue Michigan show, and blah, 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 blah. And it gets held against her. And she's a party official, and that sucks. So that makes it tough for people. Mark Kernel says, I'm calling from the floor for Adam D'Angeli for chair. See, if I was the chair, I wouldn't be able to say the things I'm saying. You know, it's one thing to be, you know, on the executive committee or whatever, and even then you got to be careful what you do. You know, there's a state lawmaker who voted wrong on those bills who's in my county. We might need to get reelected, you know, so I don't want to bash her excessively, because now there's a conflict, you know, and you got to deal with those things. So I have to be cognizant of the fact that my opinions about who should be chair, you know, they can, you know, reflect on, you know, everything else that we're doing. So all that being said, I want to tread carefully on things. I have said quite a lot about Matt DePerno before he became the nominee for Attorney General. When he became the nominee, I was a good boy and I was quiet about this. Mark says, no jokes on Adam's show. Well, luckily for me, my give a fuck meter is broken, so I'll say what I want. But, you know, I want to be cognizant, because, you know, people go around and say, oh, Adam D'Angeli endorses so-and-so, and, you know, what if so-and-so wins? And I turn out to be wrong, you know? So anyway, GOP chair, I'm supporting Greenlee. Because frankly, I think he's the only person who's not completely unqualified for that job. And I'm gonna get shit for that, just for saying it, because he worked for John McCain. Yeah, I know, I couldn't stand John McCain. Well, you know what, he's a political operative. And not all of them have the privilege that I have been to be selective about who I work for. So I personally do not hold that against him. Mark says, anyone but not Matt. Well, I don't know about that. Matt DePerno, for those who don't know, and I've talked about this on the show probably a long time ago, more recently. I think Matt DePerno single-handedly destroyed the election integrity movement in Michigan. I think he turned it from being all about the things that we know did happen, like absentee ballot fraud, signature matches, mass mailing of ballots, and everything else, into this story about the magic voting machines, based on a case that had no real premise to begin with, the Antrim County thing, where columns were flipped, human error easily explained. And all the hard evidence, all the real evidence got swept under the rug for the Dominion stuff. So I'm not a fan of Matt DePernos. Not a fan of Christina Carramos either, though, unfortunately. I supported her for Secretary of State when she won the nomination. I voted for her. She's one of those candidates that somehow has just gotten worse and worse over time. Usually doesn't work that way. Usually you're new to politics, you learn the ropes, you get better. Christina's like going the opposite direction. You don't see that very often. I see that with Trump now that I think about it, though. Trump has been getting worse and worse as a politician. Have you guys noticed that? But no, Christina's gone like off the deep end lately. I don't get it. I do not get it. She won the nomination and instantly went harder to the right, which is what you don't do when you're the nominee. And now is like demanding that there be hand counts at the convention. You know, and again, going right back to the voting machine stuff. There was a hand count in the past April convention and took hours and hours and hours. And all it did was have they counted everything up by hand. Turned out the machines got it right the first time, of course. Mark says, as soon as Matt stopped getting monies, he ran far away from that election issues. No, Matt was, I don't fault him for that. Matt was the nominee and wanted to win. That was okay. The problem with Matt, here's something people don't know about him. There was this couple in Lansing, this Tea Party couple, this anti-establishment grassroots couple that got elected to Lansing in, must have been 2014. And Todd Corser and Cindy Gamrat. And almost immediately they betrayed their supporters, had an affair. They both were married and had children at home. And everybody in Lansing found out about it pretty much instantaneously because they weren't as slick as they thought they were. Some of you guys might remember this story. And it turned out that when Todd Corser started getting these text messages saying, you better resign or I'm going to tell everybody about your affair with Cindy, he brought his staff into his office and said, hey, here's what we're going to do. You're going to go home and you're going to start spreading rumors on the internet that actually I'm a drug addict and I'm behind Omar's jacking people off after hours for my money for my drug fix. Because you see, this story is so completely crazy that when the real story comes out about me having an affair, people are going to say, oh, no, it's just more of those rumors. Yeah, Aaron remembers the term. Inoculate the herd, as Todd Corser said. Another term he had for it was a controlled burn. And the reason why we know what he said to his staffers was because they were taping him. Because Cindy and Todd had another problem that all too many freshman lawmakers and lawmakers in general have, which is they treat their staff like garbage. Because you know, especially with these grassroots people, when they get elected, they think they're these what's the word, prophets or prodigies or something or other. They think they're special. They think they're better than everybody else. Well, they weren't. Treated their staff like garbage. Their staff was getting fed up, and then they went and did this. So the staff takes the tape to the Detroit News, and then there are hearings to expel Cindy and Todd. And eventually, I think, surprisingly, Cindy had to be expelled, and Todd Corser resigned in the last minute. Yeah, Dwayne says this. Yeah, there's a whole episode of 2020 about this. In fact, at the end of the episode, it shows Cindy then started a group for women who are being spied on by their abusive husbands, because it turned out her husband was the one that sent that threatening text. And of course, it wasn't her fault. It wasn't Todd Corser's fault for having the affair and lying about it. No, it was her husband's fault for finding out and trying to make him stop. Anyway, so they blamed everybody but themselves. And then Todd Corser decides to sue everybody in Lansing. So he sues the House. He sues the Speaker of the House. He sues the business office manager of the House. He sues his staffers. He sues all the members of the committee to expel Cindy and Todd. He sues the Detroit News. He sues the hotel where they were banging in. And as you might imagine, the cases all got thrown out. I think, in fact, the case against the Radisson Hotel is still, for some reason, still in litigation, but other than that, the cases were all thrown out. Todd was ordered to pay, and Todd and his lawyer were ordered to pay thousands of dollars in damages. They appealed the damages and settled out of court on the Detroit News for I think it was like 10 grand or something like that. The attorney who filed all of these meritless lawsuits was Matt DePerno. Now, you might say, well, Adam, Matt DePerno's a lawyer. He's just a professional doing his job for his clients. Yes, he is. And, you know, there's all kinds of jobs out there that are dirty, but someone's got to do them. I get that. However, when you run for office, these things are a liability. And those can be bad. For example, having been the guy who was the attorney for the one who sued the House and the Detroit News and Ed McBroom, led to all of Lansing having a personal axe to grind against Matt DePerno. So, did Matt DePerno do anything wrong representing his client's interests? No. But that doesn't mean you get to run for office. You know, people ask me to run for office all the time. I'm like, are you kidding? Look at all the things I say on the internet. Every single thing I say every week could be a problem for that. And if I was to run for office, those would all be used against me. Now, doesn't mean I don't have a right to run for office, but that's a hurdle that you have to overcome. So that's just not for me. Running for Attorney General wasn't for Matt. But he did it anyway. And he took everybody's money and he went on to lose. So, and he'll be frozen out again if he's the state chair. I mean, look at all the other people that are running too, by the way. It's not just Matt DePerno. Christina Caramo. No background in fundraising or being a party member to speak of. She just came out of nowhere in the 2020 election. Billy Putman, reality star. Does that make him qualified to be a state chair? No. Cool Mike. I like the guy. Does he have the experience and know how to fundraise enough to be a state? No. Being a state chair involves knowing how to raise money. And people say, oh, you don't need to raise money. Yeah, you do. Yeah, you do. You know, I'm on my county executive committee. We need to raise money so we can make publications, book speakers, do events, pay for mailings. Politics does cost money. You have to be able to do it. And if you don't have the capability to raise millions of dollars, you shouldn't be running for state chair. I am not qualified to be the state chair, okay? If I'm not qualified, Christina certainly ain't qualified. Nor Putman, nor Glazer, who has freely admitted all these events he goes to. He's only been in office he's only been involved in politics for 2 years. Mark says, I heard a rumor Matt has $80K left over from his AG election and is using it to run for chair. Man, it could be. Who knows? Doesn't matter. I doubt it. If he was, what's he spending it on? I mean, I don't know. I haven't seen any mailings or anything from anybody. Running for these party offices is cheap. It's easy. Doesn't take much. But no, Scott Greenlee's, he's been involved in politics for 20 plus years. He's worked on hundreds of campaigns. He's raised millions of dollars. That's the kind of person you'd need for a state chair, period. And you can't just say, oh, but he's establishment. So what did he do? What did he do to anybody that makes that a disqualification? I don't see anything. Yeah, frankly, I didn't see anything wrong with Ron Weiser, but people just made stuff up about him constantly. He supported these rhinos. No, he didn't. The HRCC did. The SRC did. Marcus says, what didn't he do? Who? Mark, no, what didn't he do? If you're asking about Ron Weiser, what he didn't do is not open his wallet. He spent millions and millions and millions of dollars of his own money funding conservatives and Republicans across the board for years. Until he got treated like a leper and a pariah at the last day convention. He said, you know what? I'm done. I've given these people millions of my money and they've responded by treating me like garbage. So I'm not going to give them any money anymore. And he retired. And that was the end of it. So way to be. We need a state chair who will be fair. And by the way, I wouldn't be so sure as everybody else is, apparently, that these other candidates would be fair. But you also need someone that knows how to raise money. And Scott's the only one that possibly can. So he's who I'm supporting for chair. Vice chairs, couldn't care less about any of them, frankly. In all my time in politics, I've never known a vice chair to do anything in particular of note. And they don't have any real power anyway, so that's that. And of course, for my district chair, I'm supporting our very own Patty P, who is running for district chair I think she just announced this week. It was after last week's show. I wasn't sure she's going to announce, but she has announced now. And Patty is the kind of person you'd for a district chair, someone who works her tail off, someone who's full of integrity, someone who's not in it for their personal ambitions. So I'm supporting Patty for district chair. And that's about it, folks. That is about it for the state convention. Don't get all bent out of shape about this convention, though, to be honest. I mean, I'm not making a battle out of getting Scott Greenlee elected. You're very welcome, Patty, of course. Because we need someone like you to be our district chair. But in general, folks, I would say the real fight in politics is not within the GOP. It's with the lawmakers, the people who actually make policy. And it feels like it's been an entire year of fighting with the GOP for positions of power. And for what has it gotten us? Huge losses in last November's election. That's all. Bill Hamilton says, I'm supporting Casey Armitage for 9th District Chair. There you go. I don't know anything about her. I'm not in the 9th District, and I don't know who else is running. But there you go. That's Bill Hamilton's opinion. So thank you, Bill. Yeah, people have asked me about this district and that district. I'm like, look, I don't know these districts. Nobody does. I barely know my own county, let alone the other counties in my district. And I'm one of the most politically active people there are. So that's just the way that goes. So Mark says, paid the $50 and shut up and go to state convention. Yep. So there you go. All right, folks. I think that's about it for us for tonight. There is, I believe, one more show this next Sunday, and then the convention is after that. So yeah, good plug from Paula Ganacki for Patty as well. So there you go. All right, guys, that's all I got for this week. Join us at the Grassroots Leadership Schools. They are in Ann Arbor the weekend after convention, February 25th, the Saturday, and then the other one is in Troy the weekend after on March 4th. And we'll be talking a lot more about all the great things that we can do to hold our politicians accountable and to building the infrastructure that we need to do so. And of course, to actually win the elections. And hopefully win back majority, which is, not a bad thing either. So there you go. All right, guys, I think that's about all I had for us for tonight. Yeah, pretty much. All right, good enough. All right, thanks as always, guys, for all you do for liberty. Until then, hey, Mark says I was going to the one in Troy. Great, sign up on our website. Until then, thanks again for all you guys do for liberty. Peace.